too long, the world has been taught to look elsewhere, to the other side of the globe, for the origin of life, civilization, and sacred ground. People have been programmed to believe that history began in places that align with modern power structures, leaving out the most important truths that could uplift and restore a people who have been robbed of more than land. They have been robbed of identity. But what if I told you that Eden, the very foundation of the human story, the sacred beginning of all things, was not in some faraway desert, but here on the very soil walked by black feet long before any flag was planted? What if the Garden of Eden was in America? Not the America we were taught in textbooks, but an ancient, vibrant, spiritually rich land cultivated by a people who lived in harmony with nature and divinity. This truth may sound controversial to some, even unbelievable to others, but only because the truth has been hidden, manipulated, and distorted for centuries. The idea that Eden was a black land and that it was here in America is not just a theory, it's a call to consciousness. It's not about geography alone, it's about reclaiming what was erased. It's about waking up from the sleep of colonized thinking and realizing that the original people of this planet were black, and they were not wandering aimlessly. They were rooted in wisdom, science, art, spirituality, and a connection to the earth that modern society still cannot replicate. Before any so-called discovery, before the ships and shackles, there was civilization, not survival, civilization. There were structures, languages, star charts, and systems that guided humanity through seasons and spiritual rhythms. In the Americas, there were nations, black nations, long before anyone else arrived. These weren't primitive people. They were masters of balance, harmony, and higher understanding. They built mounds that align with the stars. They grew food that healed the body, and they understood the cycle of life in ways that modern institutions still fail to grasp. But what was taken wasn't just land, it was story. The conquerors didn't just want to dominate people, they wanted to dominate memory. They knew that if they could make you forget who you were, they could control what you became. They knew that if they painted Eden somewhere else and gave it another face, they could rob you of the power that comes from knowing you come from sacred ground. But the soil remembers. The earth tells a story that no textbook can rewrite. Beneath the concrete, under the highways and skyscrapers, there is still a pulse, a rhythm from the past that sings in the bones of every black person who has ever felt like there's something more, something deeper, something ancient calling to them. This isn't just about being proud. It's about being free, because the chains that bind us now are not on our wrists, they're in our minds. We've been taught to see ourselves as the last in line, when in truth we were the first builders, the first farmers, the first healers, the first spiritualists, the first to walk in harmony with creation. Eden wasn't a myth, it was a way of life. And that life was centered around unity, balance, and sacred purpose. So many ask, why does it matter where Eden was? It matters because your origin determines your perception. If you believe you come from poverty, you will expect scarcity. But if you know you come from paradise, you will demand greatness, not just from the world, but from yourself. Knowing Eden was a black land isn't about dividing. It's about revealing. It's about letting the light of truth shine into the places where lies have lingered for too long. For centuries, black people have carried the weight of a world that tried to erase their beginnings. Every generation has had to fight for pieces of dignity and systems designed to strip it away. But what if dignity isn't something to earn, it's something to remember? What if the answer to our liberation isn't ahead of us, but behind us in the sacred knowledge of who we've always been? America is more than a country. It is a land with memory. The trees remember the footsteps of kings who never wore crowns. The rivers remember the prayers of healers who never wore robes. The land remembers even if we have forgotten. The greatest deception ever told was not just about race. It was about place. Because if you don't know where your power comes from, you'll keep looking outside yourself for it. But the power is here, in the soil, in your skin, in your story. This speech is not about bitterness. It is about awakening. Because when a people awaken to who they are, They stop asking for permission. They stop seeking validation from systems that were never built for their success. They start building their own. The Garden of Eden was not about religion. It was about relationship with nature, with the divine, with each other. And that sacred relationship is still possible today if we remember. Remember that we were not born into sin. We were born into royalty. We were not created to be ruled. We were created to rule over ourselves with wisdom, discipline, and grace. The truth is not always convenient, and it rarely comes without controversy. But truth is what sets you free. And the truth is, Eden was black. Eden was here. And Eden is not lost. It lives in you. When you rise in the morning, understand that your breath is the breath of survivors, builders, creators, and sacred beings. You are not cursed. You are chosen. You are not forgotten. You are the foundation. The story of humanity does not start with chains. It starts with glory. The world may never teach you this truth, but truth is not dependent on permission. It is waiting for you to reclaim it. We don't need to convince the world. We need to awaken ourselves. When we do, nothing can stop the movement that begins. This message is not just for black people. It is for every human being who is seeking the truth, because the world cannot heal if it is built on lies, and the healing begins when the truth is known. You are more than a reflection of what the world tells you to be. You are a reflection of the original blueprint of life itself. So walk with pride, not because the world gives you a reason, but because you know the truth of where you come from. Eden wasn't somewhere far away. It was right here, in the heart of a land that still carries sacred energy. And the black people who walked it weren't lost. They were the original guides, the keepers of the flame, the protectors of wisdom, the stewards of sacred land. That knowledge is your inheritance. That power is your birthright. And that truth is the beginning of your freedom. For centuries, a calculated silence has surrounded the truth of black identity. This silence wasn't accidental. It wasn't born out of ignorance. It was constructed with intention, strategy, and a determination to erase the sacred foundation of black existence. History books have been edited, stories altered, and ancient knowledge buried, all to ensure that the world never truly understands the divine origin of black people. What many have been told about the beginning of humanity has often come filtered through a lens that intentionally excluded Africa and black civilizations from the center of the narrative. But the truth is this: before borders, before flags, before colonization, there was black land, black culture, and black brilliance. The idea that Eden, the very beginning of human life, was located in a land of dark soil and dark skin is not a radical claim. It is a truth that has been distorted to preserve a myth of superiority. When the world was young and untouched by empires and conquest, there existed regions filled with lush rivers, sacred trees, and an unshakable harmony between the earth and its people. These regions were inhabited by black people, visionaries, builders, healers, astronomers, whose knowledge predated what is now called science. To erase them from the birthplace of creation wasn't just a slight. It was a deliberate attempt to control the future by manipulating the past. This distortion didn't end with textbooks or maps. It was reinforced through media, policy, religion, and economics. It taught generations of black children that their story began with chains instead of crowns, that they were born into struggle instead of strength. But you must understand, if the origin is manipulated, the future becomes misdirected. That's what colonization was about. Not just controlling land, but dominating the imagination of the people who lived on it. If you can convince someone they come from nothing, you can make them believe they are nothing. But the truth has power, and truth, once revealed, cannot be unlearned. You were never meant to be hidden. Your legacy was never meant to be a footnote. The people of ancient lands, those who spoke to the stars, who built civilizations without the tools of steel, who understood the sacred rhythms of the earth, were not primitive. They were profound. Their memories live in the soil, in the stones, in the rivers that still flow through forgotten lands. Even in the Americas, long before colonial ships arrived, there existed knowledge, architecture, and language systems that traced back to Africa. The connection between the two lands is not a fantasy. It is a suppressed truth that many are only now starting to rediscover. The question is not whether this knowledge existed. The real question is why it was buried. Why has there been so much effort to keep black people disconnected from their true beginning? Because when a person knows where they came from, they walk differently, they speak with conviction, they carry the confidence of purpose. And when a people rise together with that awareness, no system can contain their potential. That's why the erasure was so aggressive. That's why the lie had to be repeated over and over again. Because the moment you realize you were never meant to be at the bottom, you begin to rise. This isn't about bitterness or blame. It's about clarity. It's about setting the record straight for the next generation. It's about replacing shame with pride, confusion with truth, and doubt with destiny. The strength of a people lies not in how much they endure, but in how deeply they understand who they truly are. And for black people, the truth is not just powerful, it's sacred. Because if Eden was black, then so was the divine idea of humanity. And if the Garden of Eden was not some faraway myth, but a place rooted in lands tied to black soil, then your existence has never been accidental. It has always been intentional, chosen, and blessed. Throughout human history, people have searched for the Garden of Eden not merely as a physical location, but as a symbol of human origin, purpose, and divine intention. The pursuit has been filled with theories, maps, and debates, but very few have asked a more powerful question: what does Eden represent, and who truly belongs to that beginning? When you begin to understand that Eden was more than land, that it was identity, wholeness, and divine placement, you begin to challenge everything the world has told you about where you come from. The attempt to disconnect black people from Eden was not just about misplacing geography. It was a spiritual attack against self-worth. When a people are denied their beginning, they are robbed of their belonging. Eden was not just a garden. It was a state of alignment between humanity and the Creator, a space where dignity was inherent and shame did not exist. To associate that sacred origin with blackness is not rewriting history, it is reclaiming the truth. For far too long, black communities have been forced to accept a narrative where their story starts in slavery, subjugation, or struggle. But your history doesn't begin in chains. It begins in creation. To place yourself back in Eden is not a fantasy, it is healing. It is a declaration that you are not lost, and that your spirit has always been part of something sacred and intentional. Understanding Eden as black land challenges the idea that black identity is tied to suffering. Instead, it ties your existence to sacred beginnings. And when a person connects their identity with something divine, they no longer walk as if they are less than. They rise into their true reflection. Black people around the world have been carrying pieces of Eden within them: ancestral wisdom, sacred traditions, deep resilience, but were never told where that power truly came from. Recognizing Eden in the context of your heritage is like waking up to a truth your soul always knew, but was never allowed to speak. This isn't about claiming superiority, it's about reclaiming what was stolen through silence. When colonizers spread across continents, they didn't just steal land or gold. They stole names, they destroyed records, and they covered up connections. They didn't want you to know that the rhythm in your spirit, the strength in your blood, and the glow of your skin was part of Eden's original light. They couldn't let you believe that you were formed in divine love and placed in a world that was once unbroken. Because if you ever knew the truth, if you ever believed you were part of something so sacred, you would rise beyond the systems they built to contain you. This understanding brings back purpose, because when you know that your ancestors walked in lands that were called holy, not in the eyes of conquerors, but in the memory of the earth, you begin to carry yourself differently. You speak with conviction. You move with clarity. You no longer search for validation in broken systems, because you remember you come from wholeness. Reclaiming Eden is not about arguing with historians. It's about restoring dignity to generations who were taught to question their value. It's about rewriting your own future by remembering your real past. To identify Eden with black land is to say to every black boy and girl, you are not the product of accident or pity. You are the result of design, of vision, of original beauty. And if Eden was your beginning, then greatness is not a distant dream. It is your inheritance. Every lie that told you that you were less than human, every policy that treated you as property, every image that portrayed you as inferior, Those were tools to keep you away from this very truth. Because the moment you return to your true origin, you cannot be controlled. You cannot be broken by systems that never recognized your soul to begin with. Your identity is not shaped by trauma. It is rooted in truth. And that truth began in a garden, a sacred place that mirrors the depth, wisdom, and power within you. When you embrace this, you don't just find a location, you find yourself. Eden is not just a place you come from, it's a truth you return to. It's a voice in your spirit that tells you that you were made in purpose, by purpose, for purpose. And no matter how much the world tries to rewrite that origin, the truth still lives in your bones, in your blood, and in your becoming. Reclaim it. Before any ships arrived, before any flags were planted, before any so-called discovery was claimed, the land now known as America pulsed with a memory far older than textbooks dare to acknowledge. It was not a wilderness waiting for rescue. It was not a blank page ready to be written on by foreign hands. It was already a living library of sacred truths, held together by the souls who walked it, protected by those who understood its language. Black civilizations, deeply rooted in ancient customs, wisdom, and alignment with nature, were the guardians of this sacred space. Their fingerprints are still in the soil. Their voices still echo through the rivers and mountains. They didn't just survive on the land. They honored it, lived in rhythm with it, and built systems of life that reflected the divine order of the universe. There is a spiritual memory here that modern history cannot erase. You feel it when you walk barefoot across the earth. You feel it in the rhythms of ancient drums that still beat in the hearts of descendants. You feel it in the silence that speaks louder than any book written by those who tried to bury the truth. That memory says, we were here, we built, we loved, we lived fully. These civilizations didn't need concrete towers to prove intelligence. They didn't need armies to demand respect. Their strength was in balance, in their unshakable bond with the land and the divine. They understood cycles. They mapped stars without telescopes. They healed with the earth's own medicine, and they built without destroying the soul of the world around them. The lie that nothing existed before colonization is one of the greatest acts of theft, not just of land, but of legacy. To say that black people only came to this land through chains is to ignore the deeper truth. Many were already here, thriving, leading, building, remembering. And those who came later brought with them memories stored in their blood, whispers of greatness carried across oceans. The knowledge was never lost. It was only silenced. But memory, especially spiritual memory, does not die. It waits. It waits for voices brave enough to speak it again. America is not just a modern country with a short history. It is an ancient spiritual land, a place where sacred architecture once stood, aligned with the heavens, a place where rituals were not empty but purposeful, connecting people to creation, a place where melanin-rich skin was not feared but honored because it reflected the sun and reminded all of divine design. To believe this is not to rewrite history, it is to uncover it, to tell the truth that was covered with layers of distortion and denial. Black civilizations carved meaning into every stone, every song, every ceremony. They knew this land long before it had borders, presidents, or plantations. And that knowledge still lingers. It's in the stories passed down around fires. It's in the symbols etched into caves and rocks. It's in the instinct that pulls people back to their roots, even if they don't understand why. The truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone bold enough to reveal it. When we remember that America was sacred before it was invaded, we remember ourselves differently. We see that the suffering that followed colonization wasn't the beginning. It was an interruption, a violent pause in a song that was already being sung in harmony with the divine. And now that song is rising again. The voices are returning. The truth is pushing through the cracks. The land remembers, and it calls out to those whose ancestors once walked in power, not to grieve, but to rise, to reclaim, to rebuild. You are not just walking on land. You are walking on memory. You are walking on sacred ground that once recognized your face, your voice, your spirit. The past is not gone, it's calling. And when you listen, you no longer feel lost in the world. You begin to see that the power you've been searching for has always been beneath your feet. The land knows who you are. The ancestors know. Now it's time for you to remember too. There is a power that no government can control, no institution can regulate, and no oppressor can take away. It is the power that rises when people remember who they truly are. Not just names or dates, not just places or faces, but identity in its most divine form. Long before systems were built to limit potential, long before politics claimed authority over purpose, there existed a sacred understanding deep within black people, a knowing that they were created in power, shaped by the Creator, and destined to lead with purpose. This remembrance is not just nostalgic reflection. It is the key to unlocking a kind of freedom that no law can grant and no enemy can destroy. When you strip away centuries of manipulation, control, and distortion, what remains is truth, pure, undiluted, and eternal. The truth that black people were not born into brokenness. They were not created to beg for freedom, to request equality, or to depend on validation from outside voices. They were born whole, royal, brilliant, and divine. That truth may have been buried under chains, rewritten in textbooks, and ridiculed in public, but it never disappeared. It lives in the blood. It lives in the soul. And the moment you start remembering, something sacred awakens. Systems are built to distract from identity. They offer titles, rules, politics, and structures, but they fear remembrance. Because when you remember your spiritual origin, you stop playing by their rules. You stop waiting for permission to be great. You stop explaining your existence. You start walking with the authority you were born with. True liberation cannot begin in the hands of systems, because those systems were never built for your freedom. They were designed to limit you, but your spirit was never meant to live in a cage. It was meant to rise, to move, to speak, to build, to reign. And here lies the challenge of this generation, not just to fight injustice, not just to demand change, but to go deeper, to reach inside and pull forward the truth that has been hidden, to teach the children not just how to survive, but who they are before the world gave them a name. This is not just about resistance, it's about remembrance. Because when you remember, you realign, you reclaim, you begin to see with eyes not blinded by pain, but sharpened by purpose. This is why our ancestors held on to their stories, even in silence. This is why rhythm and spirit traveled across oceans, even when bodies were chained. This is why, despite generations of lies, the truth still finds its way into our dreams, our bones, our breath. The divine foundation was never lost. It was only ignored. But now, it's time to listen again. The whispers are growing louder. The fire inside is starting to burn again. And that flame cannot be put out by fear. The world will try to convince you that your value comes from degrees, positions, votes, or applause. But those are shallow wells. They dry up quickly. Real power, soul power, comes from the unshakable awareness that you were born to be more than a product of suffering. You were born to be a reflection of divine order, to live boldly, to think freely, to create what has never been seen. That kind of power cannot be given. It must be remembered. And once it is, you can never be controlled again. This is not about turning back time. It's about stepping into truth. When you understand the strength in your roots, you begin to stand differently. You speak with clarity. You move with confidence. You stop being tossed by every opinion or trend because you are grounded in something older than this moment. The foundation is not new. It is ancient, and it is calling you to stand on it once more. This is the kind of remembering that restores dignity, commands respect, and heals the soul. This is where liberation begins. Not with legislation, but with revelation. Not with policies, but with purpose. You are not waiting for anyone to save you. You were born with the truth already written inside. All you have to do now is remember. The moment we begin to correct the narrative of black history is the moment we start healing the world. Not just the wounds of one people, but the distorted perception that has infected generations across every corner of the globe. This healing begins when we no longer accept the lie that blackness was an afterthought in human development, but instead recognize it as the very beginning. When the world remembers that black people were not the oppressed first, but the originators, the builders, the caretakers of knowledge and land, then healing doesn't just happen in one community, it begins to reach into the hearts of all who were taught division. There's something deeply spiritual about telling the truth after centuries of silence. It carries a kind of restoration that no money, no title, and no policy can offer. The truth is that the history of the world cannot be told honestly without black people at the foundation. From the very soil that birthed humanity to the first civilizations that raised cities from stone and thought from silence, black people were not just present, they were essential. The misplacement of their identity is not a small error. It is the root of so much brokenness. And when that root is healed, it begins to touch every branch. When you restore the truth, you restore the image. You don't just give people back their past, you give them back their dignity. And dignity is not just self-worth. It's the key to treating others right, to building unity, and to ending cycles of violence and oppression. Because when you've been lied to about someone else's value, you've also been lied to about your own. And when you finally learn the truth about them, you find a deeper truth about yourself. The healing that comes from placing black people at the true start of the human story does more than just uplift one group. It corrects the world's sense of direction. It closes a gap between races, nations, and cultures that has been widened by arrogance and ignorance. You see, when one people is falsely placed at the bottom, another is falsely lifted to the top. And that imbalance leads to pride, fear, violence, and systems of control. But the moment we restore what was stolen, balance returns. Not just in textbooks or documentaries, but in the way we see each other, the way we treat one another, the way we live side by side. This is not about revenge. This is not about rewriting the past to shame the present. This is about honoring the beginning so the future can be whole. Because a broken foundation cannot support a just world, and a lie cannot be the cornerstone of peace. But the truth has the power to tear down walls, to build bridges, to raise new generations that no longer inherit the pain of the old wounds. When the global mind is no longer confused about where life began, it becomes harder to justify discrimination. It becomes harder to justify poverty in Africa while the rest of the world thrives on her stolen resources. It becomes harder to look away when injustice knocks on a neighbor's door. Truth reminds us of our shared roots. It pulls us out of our pride and into humility. It calls us not just to acknowledge what went wrong, but to restore what was right. And there's a reason why this message hits deep, why it resonates even with those who tried to forget. Because something inside every human soul is wired to seek truth. We are not at peace with injustice, no matter how much we benefit from it. And when the real origin is revealed, when the true place of black people in the story of Earth is honored, it doesn't just uplift black people, it softens the hearts of those who were hardened by centuries of superiority. It invites them to be part of the healing, because healing is not just for the wounded, it's for the world that watched them bleed. It's for the children who never knew why their schools only taught one side. It's for the mothers who whispered pride in the dark, because history books shouted lies in the daylight. It's for the future that deserves more than a recycled narrative of power and pain. This truth is not just knowledge, it's medicine. And the more it is spoken, the more it spreads. It doesn't shout or demand. It simply exists like light in the darkness. And when enough people see it, the darkness can no longer pretend to be truth. What we restore in the telling of black people's rightful place in the story of life is more than pride. It is balance. It is harmony. It is healing.